Hi all, Tom here. Thank you very much for clicking onto this video. I really want to apologize to everyone for not posting videos for the past year or so. Going forward, I hope I can post a little bit more. And everyone has been patient, and I really thank you for that. So in today's video, I want to share an interview of Shiro Miyazaki in 1990. This interview was taken right after the making of Totoro. And it's a really interesting interview that talks about their parents, his relationship with his older brothers, and it gives more insight into the Miyazaki character and Hayao Miyazaki himself. The source of where I got this from is from the Ghibli textbook 2, Castle in the Sky. If you wanted to get this yourself, you could get it from Amazon Japan, but unfortunately it's all in Japanese. There's no translated version, so you will need to know a little bit of Japanese. If you don't want to go through all that trouble, you can just watch my video. Okay, thank you very much for subscribing again, and without further ado, Family Landscape, Brother of Hayao Miyazaki, 1990, by Shiro Miyazaki. 4 brothers, all boys. Hayao Miyazaki, born on January 5th, 1941. He was born into an ordinary family, the second son of 4 brothers, all boys. And I'm the youngest, the 4th son. Now, Hayao Miyazaki has become a well-known celebrity, but for me, he's still just one of my 3 older brothers. To begin with, male siblings aren't sentimental. In the more than 20 years before Hayao left home after graduating from university, we lived under the same roof, but I have no recollection of having a close conversation with him. Come to think of it, I don't have much memory of talking with my father either. It might be the same in any family, but in our case, including our father, I think the 5 men each acted on their own. I don't know much about my brother, even as his younger sibling, but I think I'll try to trace my memories as they come to mind. Somehow, a human portrait of Hayao Miyazaki might emerge. Knowing him means knowing my other older brothers, knowing my parents, knowing the Miyazaki family, so it seems like an interesting task for me too. I have never given it much thought before, but looking back now, I realized that there were 3 people who had a great influence on us brothers. The first was our mother, the second was our father, and the third was the eldest son. Our mother passed away at the age of 71 on July 27th, 1983. I hope you associate her with Dola, the female pirate in Laputa. She was often ill, so she didn't have the physical vitality, and I like to believe she was a bit more of a beauty, but her mental strength was certainly akin to Dola's. The greatest influence our mother had on us 5 men, ironically, was that she was bedridden for almost 9 years, starting from 1947. It was a spinal caries, a severe illness at the time, caused by tuberculosis bacteria entering the spine. The first few years were spent in a hospital, and then followed by a long convalescence at home, during which her body was fixed in plaster, and she had a tough 9 years where only her neck and hands could move, regardless of spring, summer, autumn, or winter. Chores were divided among the 4 boys. Our father is currently 74 years old. He is still active in Eifukucho, Suginami Ward, Tokyo. Eifukucho is the town where we lived since 1950, and most of my childhood memories were made there. The father in my childhood memories always cherished my mother and would always talk to her about his company when he came home from work. At that time, it was not unusual for middle class and higher class families to have housekeepers, and many different housekeepers came and went from our home. However, when they suddenly quit, there were times where we couldn't find another housekeeper for months. Those times were tough. The 4 boys, with the eldest son as the leader, would share the housework. I was still small, so I was mainly in charge of shopping and heating the bath. I remember Hayao also prepared meals. Of course, on Sundays, our father would lead the way and cook. His specialties were always things like dried horse mackerel, flavored dried fish, kusaya, fermented fish, and tatami iwashi, dried sardines. And if it was miso soup, it was usually tofu cut into small dices. Thanks to that, all the food I ate back then is still my favorite. The father himself now lives alone in Eifukucho, but he avoids relying on the care of his eldest son and his wife, who live behind him, and does everything from cooking to cleaning to shopping on his own. He is in good health both physically and mentally. The eldest son was born in July of 1939. We brothers have a 2-year gap between the first and second sons, and then a 3-year gap between each subsequent sibling. I believe many people with similar experiences can relate to this. Having a 2 or 3 year difference often means you go to elementary school, middle school, and high school together. In our case, we all attended the same schools from elementary school to high school. To be precise, only my elementary school was different because it was newly established at that time. When everyone goes to the same school like fish trailing each other in water, various things happen. First, you're immediately compared with your elder brothers. The times when comparisons are made usually coincides with times of scolding and lamenting. You should learn from your elder brother, he was much better, they would say. From the second son to the 4th son, all of us brothers had left our footprints in every school we attended. Speaking of how we called each other as siblings, when an elder brother called a younger one, it was always just by name. But when the younger ones called the elder ones, the second son, Hayao, was Ha-chan. and the third son, Hiroshi, was Yuta-chan. When it came to a quarrel, Ha-chan turned into Hachiguso, Yuta-san turned into Yuguso, and my Shiro turned into Shiguso. The eldest son, however, was always brother at any time, curiously enough. The eldest son wielded immense power over us younger brothers. After all, he was formidable in fights. He was a so-called bancho, gang leader in elementary, middle school, and high school. He was athletic, good at studies, and filled with leadership and energy. Walking on the path carved out by such an eldest brother, the second son, Hayao, trudged along. My older brother, Hayao, tended to be introverted and frail, with sports not being his strong suit. His interests were reading books and drawing. In today's world, he would seem like the perfect target for bullying. On the other hand, no one ever thought about doing such a thing, as he was under the overwhelming protection of his eldest brother. This was the case in both middle and high school. Although their personalities were completely different, both were apparently intelligent. If they had studied properly, it was said that they were sure to get into University of Tokyo. But unfortunately, the eldest son spent all of his time in sports and fights, and the second son was absorbed in reading books and lost in thought. Eventually, the eldest brother, who was not at all fitting, entered Gakushuin University and spent his days playing rugby, while the younger brother, Hayao, followed him into Gakushuin. It can only be thought that he followed him. Perhaps Hayao was more influenced by his brother than I thought, or maybe it was completely the opposite. The path to art. A strong and sensitive mother who, while battling illness, watched over her husband and children from her sickbed. A father who perfectly balanced work and family life, taught his children to be independent and showed them the insignificance of superficial patriarchy and pretentiousness through his own actions. The eldest son who ran around with his own strength, always a step outside of such parents. Hayao Miyazaki grew up under the strong influence of such people. By the way, I wonder when he decided to pursue the path of art. As a high school student, he might have already made up his mind to become a manga artist. I always remember he was drawing short manga stories with black ink and light ink. I remember laughing with my parents and siblings saying things like, "The lines are dead, the expressions are all the same," or "there's no movement in the drawing." From that time, he was studying serious drawing under the guidance of his retired middle school teacher. He seemed particularly focused on sketching and croquis. He himself seemed to want to proceed to a university with an art department, but his father opposed it, suggesting he attend a regular university and spend 4 years considering his path. Consequently, he gave up on the art university. The result was that he ended up attending Gakushuin University, like his elder brother, though for him, any university might have been fine. I think he had decided to devote those 4 years to studying art in earnest. After entering university in 1959, he was particularly systematic in his study of art. In addition to sketching and croquis, whenever he had free time, he would go to Inokashira Park Zoo in Musashino City to observe and sketch animals. Believing that one must understand the skeletal structure to draw animals, he frequently drew animal skeletons and muscular structures much like Da Vinci. I remember being oddly convinced by this approach. He had declared to those around him that he would become a manga artist, and it seemed that our parents didn't oppose this too strongly. Rather, they may have been optimistic, thinking his mind would change during his university life and he'd become a salaryman. On reflection, the Miyazaki family doesn't seem to have a lineage of salarymen. Our father, while he might technically be classified as a salaryman, didn't feel like the dependable type. He was hot-tempered, often changing jobs, and it seems he even dabbled in running a bar. The eldest son found working for others disagreeable and runs his own company. The second son is a manga artist, and I, the youngest son, work for an advertising agency, a rather flexible industry. The third son is the only one who is a proper salaryman, continually moving around the country. Looking around our extended family, there aren't many salarymen. There's a mix of architects, doctors, cafe owners, and a bunch of other jobs that are hard to classify. The Miyazaki bloodline seems to lack a certain quality of submission to others. It's highly unlikely that my elder brother, Hayao, ever considered becoming a salaryman. Throughout his university life, his thoughts and passions for the world of art seemed to grow. The art teacher he studied under was not only famous as a painter, but was also a wonderful person, and even as a child, I could clearly see my brother's admiration for him. While studying art, my brother was also heavily involved in the Children's Literature Research Association at the university. Here, I believe he learned to delve deep into the human mind and developed his perspective on children and human beings. His desire and passion to become a manga artist accelerated even more. Despite that, he must have had significant anxiety about whether his skills would really work out. He too must have had doubts about the future dreams he had as a young man. It wasn't that he had an unyielding spirit and tenacity that drove him to fulfill his dreams without any hesitation. Like all young people, he must have been frantically drawing pictures to escape from his anxiety and impatience. He was not the brooding young man, head in the clouds, full of jargon and theories, as some people imagined. He was bright, diligent, and had strong focus. He had a strong sense of justice, was reluctant to compromise, and was the kind of person who would thoroughly think through one issue. Speaking of which, it's a peculiar thing about siblings. All 4 of us have similar traits in different ways. It's not that someone is exactly like someone else, but parts of A and B are similar, parts of C and D are similar. For example, the eldest and youngest son like sports, the second and youngest son likes drawing, the third and youngest son likes music, the eldest and the third sons are hot-tempered, the second and third sons are hard-working types, the second and youngest sons are dreamers, and the drinkers. The people we quarreled with were also largely fixed. The eldest was in a separate category. The second son, Hayao's counterpart, was the third son, and my counterpart was mostly the third son as well. The ones who often talked with our mother were Hayao and me. I, who didn't know the countryside, often listened to my mother's childhood memories in her ruled hometown and imagined the nature of Yamanashi. For her, I seemed to have been a pitiful youngest child from the time I became aware of the world. Because I was bedridden, so she often spoke to me. I really enjoyed those times. Hayao had more complex conversations with our mother, and could discuss these topics more than equally with her high school and university-aged sons. During the 1960s ample protests that shook Japan, he was in his second year of university. He was not radical, but it seems he did participate in demonstrations, and he often discussed the ampo issue, ideologies, economics, and such with our mother. I think he was rational, not an egocentric dogmatist. In later years, she often remembered his adolescence and told us that among her 4 children, he was the purest one. Hayao, upon graduating from university and finding employment at Toei Animation, quickly left home to live in a boarding house, and then married a coworker before our eldest brother did, and settled down on the outskirts of Tokorozawa. It was as if becoming independent as soon as possible was essential for pursuing the path he had chosen. Now, as I go back and read what I've written so far, I notice that the third son's presence seems a bit thin. I'll touch on him a bit here. As the youngest son, I had to pay some regard to each of my older brothers. While I mentioned that the 4 boys each had similar aspects, when looking at them in total, it seems like the third son was the most different among us. Born in January 1944, he is a diligent type but short-tempered. I don't know about now, but in his school days, as far as I knew, he was a show-off. Maybe that's why his wife is the most beautiful one. He's stubborn and doesn't compromise his beliefs. That's why he often clashed with my oldest brother. In any case, the two never agreed and always ended up fighting whenever they opened their mouths. I think he hated superficial romanticism and hypocrisy to the extreme. The fights in our house were fierce. Wrestling matches were a daily occurrence. The shoji and futsuma, Japanese sliding doors, were always being torn. And there was even a time when he drew a Japanese sword and ran out into the garden. Especially during the 9 years when our mother was bedridden. The fights were particularly brutal. I think it was because our mother couldn't keep an eye on us. Conversely, we never fought in front of our mother. The 3 brothers were all assertive, never conceding to each other, full of competitive spirit. The house was filled with men everywhere you looked. If a young woman were to step into our house, she'd probably feel dizzy from their overwhelming masculinity. None of our sons grew up the way the parents had hoped. Their personalities were simply too strong, for better or worse. Epilogue. I've been writing just as I think, which may be annoying to my elder brother Hayao. I should be prepared for the next time we meet. Finally, Nazca the Valley of the Wind was a film jointly produced for the first time by Tokuma Shonen and the advertising agency Hakuhodo 6 years ago. My elder brother, as the original creator, screenwriter, and director, and I, purely by coincidence, participated as a member of the Nazca project on the Hakuhodo side. We ended up working together on the same project as brothers. The production staff was decided, and just 3 days before the final rally party held in Asagaya, Tokyo, at the end of July 1983, our mother passed away without knowing that her sons were going to work on the same project. She had fought her illness until the end, living for 71 years. The following year, Nazca was a hit. I genuinely regret that she couldn't live just 1 more year. 3 years after Nazca, Hayao created Castle in the Sky. After the preview, I felt as if I understood. Maybe it was a clumsy but heartfelt farewell he sent to our mother through the film. On the other hand, in My Neighbor Totoro last year, there was just a sense of joy in being able to fully express the world he had nurtured for a long time, which was refreshing. As for me, I was reminded of the old house in Eifukucho 35 years ago by the dilapidated western house in the film. And I remembered my sickly mother from the past when I saw the kind mother in a kimono who was recovering in a hospital in Shichikoku-yama. Of course, Hayao didn't want to evoke such nostalgia. Rather, he was afraid of being taken that way. The film won many awards, and Hayao Miyazaki became a bit more famous. I wonder what our mother would have said if she were alive. "You finally relaxed a bit, and you're doing better," she might have said. To me, Hayao is nothing more than the second eldest of our 4 brothers, and we meet once a year at New Year's to have a drink.